Our scripture this morning is from the book of Matthew, chapter 5. You have heard it said, love your neighbor, but hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for your persecutors. This will prove that you are children of God. For God makes the sun rise on bad and good alike. God's rain falls on the just and the unjust. If you love those who love you, what merit is there in that? Don't tax collectors do as much? If you greet only your sisters and brothers, what is so praiseworthy about that? Don't Gentiles do as much? Therefore, be perfect as God in heaven is perfect. Ancient words for our modern day consideration.
I modeled imperfection there to get started. We live at an amazing time in history. Christian nationalism is one of the most cancerous forces in our nation, one of the most unloving, most uncharitable. And we see charter schools starting to receive public monies. We see libraries being shut down. We see counselors in schools. The school districts will get to vote on whether to have, and imagine the pressure on school boards to bring in these unskilled Christian counselors who have not necessarily studied psychology, who may believe that all difficulties come from demons, and yet that's what public funding will do. Now, I believe that's not the best we can do. But to do the kind of Christianity that Jesus did requires us to step out of our comfort zone. Big time. In a way that doesn't usually happen in churches. We're looking at a saying of Jesus. You've heard it said through our tradition, but I'm saying something different. The question I'd like you to think about throughout this sermon, and hopefully even after the sermon, is how do you know that your religion is not just made up? Because if we're going to have a faith strong enough to change the world, it's got to be stronger than the world. We can't treat ourselves like invalids. We can't close our ears to unpleasant truths. We can't keep our religion immune from critical thought and help save the world. But that's going to require a different kind of faith than I was taught. What I was taught is faith is believing the things that the preacher said. And they're true because they had been said so many times. It's like, if it's false, why would we all get together and say it every week? I suggest that's not going to be helpful for your life, but I guarantee it's not going to help save the world. So as I struggle with the text today, if you could be thinking earnestly, how do I know what I was taught is not just made up? How do I know that I was taught to pretend to feel things, pretend to think things? And that religion has no truth inside my own heart. I'm pretending. I've been taught to wear a mask. Jesus said, you've been taught not to kill, not to murder. But I say to you, what happens in your heart when you hate another person, when you're angry, when you dehumanize another person, that murder has taken place internally. You've heard it said, don't commit adultery. I say that when you treat another person like an object of your lust, there's a sense in which you've already violated that person. You've been taught to love your friends and hate your enemies. When Christianity teaches family values, that's precisely what they're doing. Love your friends, hate your enemies. When clergy bash people because they're different, not because they're hurting somebody. That's very important to stand up for people that are being hurt. But when you can only find compassion and understanding for people like you, that's not doing what Jesus is talking about in our passage today. Now, one of the things that I'm hoping will make this more credible to you is looking at the mystical tradition right before Jesus came. We're looking in this series at the Sophia passages. Sophia is the Greek word for wisdom. It's sort of the pattern that holds the universe together. And there are these, it's a cosmic hymn. It's not to be taken literally. So let's look at the Sophia passage that we'll be looking at today. It goes, all this is the book of the covenant of the Holy One, the law which Moses ordained for us as the heritage for the assemblage of Jacob. Now look at this next line. Our ancestors never fully understood its message. Our contemporaries still lack a full grasp. Now these are not Christians bashing Jewish people. These are Jewish people. Right? This is not a criticism of Judaism. It's a criticism of sectarian religion that's fallen asleep in its tradition. And people are doing things, no kind of sense of why. They're doing it because somebody else told them to do it. Our ancestors never fully understood its message. Our contemporaries still lack a full grasp. Its thoughts are wider than the oceans. Its ambitions deeper than the abyss. And I, that's Sophia, this kind of feminine image of cosmic wisdom. And I was like a stream branching off a river. Like a waterway running through a field, I said, I will water my garden, soak my flower beds. And behold, my waterway became a stream, and my stream became a river. Once again, I will send forth my teachings, shining like the dawn, that its light may be viewed far and wide. I will send forth my teaching like prophecy, and it will be to future generations. Let it be known that I have not toiled just for myself, but for all who thirst for wisdom. Sophia, like Jesus, keeps reminding us, I'm not talking about myself. So when the church makes it all about Jesus, when you're supposed to believe things and not understand why, you're not getting to the cosmic patterns of things. So what I want to suggest is there are three ways that we can know if our religion is being helpful. And again, this is just one person thinking it through. You don't want to just take this at face value. But I would suggest that your religion is helpful if it's calling out your authentic self. That'll be number one. Then number two is it illuminating your world. Is it just facts that you're supposed to believe, or is your life becoming clearer? Are you able to understand other people better? And then finally, does it overflow the vessel that it was given to you in and unite the whole world? So we'll take each one of those at a time. The first is that a healthy religion calls out your authentic self. That's not what I was taught. I was taught to pretend, to be really good at pretending, to say the right words, to pretend I had the right feelings, to pretend I didn't have questions about what I was being taught. That is a very destructive, and I would say deadly religion. Jesus said his teachings are like a seed. Now think about a seed. You put it in the soil, it kind of dies in the soil and then grows out into something that you can eat. I was taught to eat the seeds. That's what literalism is. It's saying you take the teaching at face value. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to meditate about it. It doesn't have to transform into something that makes any sense, which is kind of important for it to make sense. So I think the two alternatives are the nightmare that we see of Christian nationalism, where people think they're taking biblical language literally and just being more and more destructive, or a kind of cosmic poetry, where what we're seeing is the poem of the universe, the poem of our own hearts. I'll be quoting a couple of times from Jefferson. A lot of these people that are doing this damage call themselves originalists. They just want to get back to the wonderful days where guys in white wigs treated women as property and treated people of color literally as property. Now, Jefferson did some of that too. But listen to this saying. I just don't think that most originalists have ever read Jefferson. I don't think they've ever read Thomas Paine, because there's a fire there and a kind of fury against the kind of religion that's being imposed on people. This is, again, this is a passage you probably won't hear a lot in the Presbyterian churches today. The day will come, and this is Thomas Jefferson, this is not me. If you brought any rocks, put them on the ground right now. The day will come when the mystical generation of Jesus, by the Supreme Being as his Father, in the womb of a virgin, will be classed with the fable of the generation of Minerva in the brain of Jupiter. Let me read that again. So when this comes to trial, they'll have two. The day will come when the mystical generation of Jesus, by the Supreme Being as his Father, in the womb of a virgin, will be classed with the fable of the generation of Minerva in the brain of Jupiter. How many of you were told that it doesn't make sense, but if it did make sense, it wouldn't be faith? Now, let's think about that for just a second. Isn't it true that you could prove any religion using that as your standard? Right? If the proof is faith and it doesn't have to make sense, then all of that stuff works just fine. But we need to do better than that. We need to align our heart with the creative principle of the universe. That's a lot of the missing piece right now. We need to recognize that every person we meet is a part of our human family. And that's only found by going deeper in our human heart. You can't fake it, you can't pretend it, you have to be transformed radically from the roots. So the Sophia passage says the ancestors didn't understand this stuff. Now that's not always true. The ancients, if you read them, realize it's poetry. Right? They were singing the poetry of the universe very often. But the tradition falls asleep in that. It passes it along. So Jesus said, you've heard it said X, but I say Y. Now, how do you take the Bible literally if you do that? Right? The tradition says this, but I need you to go deeper than that. I need you to not just be obedient, I need you to be responsible. I need you to feel what your hatred towards another person does to the whole world. And feel it in your heart. And I need you to realize what your objectifying lust of another person does in your own heart and the damage that you're doing to that person. I ran across a quote this week that I kind of like. It said, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it is to act with yesterday's logic. I kind of think that's what Jesus is saying. Yes, Moses said that. Yes, Jesus said that. Yes, Buddha said that. But what is the principle that would apply today? So the first thing is, does religion invite you to be your authentic self? And then second, does it illumine your life? Are you able to see somebody who's a stranger from you and recognize them? Are you fooled by the defenses another person presents? Or can you see the human heart that is there? Because when you can look at love with another person, even as you're protesting what they're doing to somebody else, if you can both protest and protect the people they're targeting, but not lose their humanity, you invite them into the beloved community. Jesus said God's love is like the sun. It doesn't come and go. God doesn't love the just and hate the unjust. That's what the church does. Right? Good and bad. There is a love that doesn't shut down just because somebody else is confused and hurt and traumatized. Jesus said you can be children of God if you do that. Now, I don't think that kind of love is the emotional situation we talk about. This is a tender, compassionate awareness of another person. It's seeing their humanity in the spite of all the inhumane things they're doing. It doesn't mean you sit on the sidelines and you don't confront, but it means you never lose their humanity. Because what Jesus was saying is when you lose their humanity, you've actually lost your own as well. So superstition, which is believing something that doesn't make sense, believing something just because it's comfortable, just because you want to, that's superstition. It will tear the world apart. Love doesn't do that. Love doesn't believe things about us. Love sees us, hears us, feels us. On the Jefferson Memorial, Jefferson has there was a diatribe against clergy. Just like Jesus didn't like people like me, and I get it. Jefferson didn't either. So Jefferson talks about how the clergy were using the First Amendment. Stop me if you've heard it. Using freedom of the press kind of arguments to impose sectarian Christianity upon the rest of the nation. Jefferson didn't like that very much, and those clergy didn't like Jefferson very much. So he says that the prevalence of that delusion on the clause of the Constitution, which while it secured the freedom of the press, covered also freedom of religion, it had given to the clergy a very favorable hope of obtaining an establishment of a particular form of Christianity through the U.S. I think it'd be throughout the U.S., but this is his original spelling. And as every sect believes its own form to be the true one, everyone perhaps hoped for their own, but especially the Episcopalians and Congregationalists. How things change. So if you're Episcopal, I don't think he's be talking about you now. He goes, the returning good sense of our country threatens abortion to their hopes, and they believe that any portion of power confided to me will be exerted in opposition to their schemes. And they believe rightly. And this is the part that's on the Jefferson Memorial. For I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the human mind. Jesus said his truth would set you free. Is what you learned in church doing that? Is it setting you free? Is it calling you to liberate others? Because if not, then maybe what's missing is that love that doesn't come and go. If you've ever gone to the hospital and a baby born prematurely, they'll have like a light. If the baby has jaundice, and the light takes care of that. Your loving awareness does that to the world. See, Jesus was equipping us to be revolutionaries without having to be violent. I believe in activism, but the activism has to grow out of love. It has to be an overflow of love. And when somebody looks at you like that, it changes you. When you're being completely inappropriate, somebody sees through that ugliness and sees you, that changes the world. So the second thing that we're being called to is to find that love that isn't triggered by what's happening in the world. It just loves. In other words, it's compassionate awareness. It always sees the human being there, even if it has to oppose certain policies and actions and words. So then the third and final thing I hear our passage calling us to is a love that overflows the boundaries of religion. Jesus loved Judaism his whole life. He never became Presbyterian, unfortunately. It doesn't matter which religion, if it's working for you, if it's doing these three things. But all of them have to overflow their sectarian natures and call us into the common life. Are you willing to have a religion that's bigger than your business interests? Are you willing to have a religion that's bigger than your country, bigger than your patriotism, bigger than your family? Bigger than Christianity? Because that's what I think Jesus is calling us to. This is going to seem like a non sequitur, but you probably already experienced several of those in this sermon already. I got sea monkeys one time. Did anybody else get sea monkeys? What a scam, what a scam. In the back of comic books and magazines and stuff, have these little pictures. They look like little mermaids and mermen or whatever the gender pronouns sea monkeys want to have. And they just kind of wave at you. They said they could learn tricks. They turned out to be a kind of brine shrimp that dries up. And so it's in a crystal form, but then when you add the water and the minerals, the shrimp come back to life. The trick is that if you put them in the shadow and then put them in the light, they swim a little faster. That's kind of the whole panoply of their circus act. I would suggest to you that a lot of what we're seeing are people who've dried up. It's not that they're evil, but they've had to live without hope. They've had to live without anybody seeing who they really are, because in their church it's too dangerous to do that. In their family it's too dangerous to do that. Simply having a love that's growing, that's overflowing, that remembers that we're one human family. And when all is said and done, we're part of one web of life. And that's it, just remembering that, just letting that change us and deepen us and broaden us, is giving an incredible gift to the world. Even as we struggle with the political challenges and our heart breaks for the people that are being wounded, We are not powerless to address these issues. And I would suggest Jesus was talking about times that were very much like these, with bullies very much like the bullies that we face, and wounded people very, very similar to the people that break our heart. There is a love that outgrows religion. Jefferson said, expecting somebody to believe what they believed as a child is sort of like trying to fit in the clothes that fit you when you were a child. And there are a lot of people with, very tight theological pants. Let's put it like that. So when we look at our nation and we see it turning on itself, it seems to be in a death spiral, we do not have to choose despair. Jesus came to teach about a hope that guides us through times like this. But you have to ask the question, is what I have been taught really true? Is it even kind? Is it what the world needs? If not, do I have the faith to let that religion die so that something new might be born? That's not going to happen if you're giving CPR to your dead religion all the time. It's not going to happen if you're carrying the dead religion piggyback. Faith should lift you up. It shouldn't be something you have to carry around. Trust in truth, trust in kindness, and know that when the dead dreams of the past are gone, when you've let go of them, something new is always being born. Choose a religion that invites you to be your authentic self. That song of your heart, is a missing element in our world today, where people have just dissolved into a machinery and they've forgotten what it is to be human. Just being human is a tremendous gift to the world. And then just having the eyes of compassion for everybody. It doesn't matter if they're good or bad, because we take turns, don't we? We all go insane from time to time. Your love doesn't have to turn on and off. It can be like the sun's light that simply sees the human being before us. In Buddhism, they talk about everybody has Buddha mind, but there's sometimes grumpy Buddha, sometimes rude Buddha, sometimes. And then finally realize that when you take Christianity out of the cradle and let it grow, it will flow into every other path, every other way, and call us to a common life. And it will be like a spring that has become a stream, and then a river, and then an ocean that brings living water to a very parched humankind. I invite you now to your own reflection on these words.